Welcome to the third and final part of New Perspectives on Qi and the Channels, a neurophysiological explanation of acupuncture. Having gone through parts 1 and 2, looking at the history and development of Qi and the channels, and also the neurophysiological basis of the mechanisms of acupuncture, I'm now going to bring all of this together. We're going to have a look at some new ideas of considering what Qi means for us as acupuncturists or practitioners using acupuncture in a clinical setting, and how we can have a better understanding of what the channels are in the clinical setting. So it's broken up into two parts. We'll be looking at new perspectives on Qi and a new perspective on the channels. So let's do a quick review of parts 1 and 2. We've discovered that the ancient Chinese formulated a representation of the human body that was not strictly based on anatomy. They generated their understanding of the body by making comparisons with what they observed in the world around them. Using this, they were able to construct a comprehensive understanding of the human body current for their time. They developed the channels, points, and Qi to make sense of the natural phenomena that was happening around them. What became known to us in the West as Chinese medicine, probably just medicine for them, was a way to record and refer to the myriad of things that could occur with sickness and health. So for the time that they existed in, we're talking hundreds and to 2,000 to 5,000 years ago, or even earlier, this was their way of understanding what was going on in the body. This was current medical science at the time. This was the cutting edge. It's what I refer to as a poetic and profound representation of the human body, derived from a simpler perspective of complex physiology. So what happens next? Channel theory and points endure for millennia. We know this because of traditional Chinese texts. Then jumping forward, obviously there's a lot of history in between there, but I'm just grouping all of the history of Chinese medicine up until the modern day, where it was considered that this was the way to treat the body, to approach health and sickness. Then in 1939 we have Georges Solier de Meuron, who inspires the first Western wave of interest in acupuncture. We have the Chinese Cultural Revolution in 66 to 76, where acupuncture is salvaged due to its low cost and availability. As I understand, it was about to be basically thrown out of the health system, but because of the number of people throughout China and the amount of poverty and lack of resources, acupuncture was employed because it was a cheap and accessible way to treat the public, despite it not being as sophisticated as what we know it as today. So Chairman Mao Zedong promoted acupuncture and traditional medicine as a pragmatic solution to a population in dire need of medical assistance. In 1972, President Nixon witnesses acupuncture being used for surgical anesthesia, which helped to popularize acupuncture in the United States. We have the advent of modern scientific approaches, so different forms of imaging. We've got X-rays, MRIs, CT scans. We've got all these new ways of looking at the body and understanding. We've got a multitude, a bank of research now, from dissections and autopsies and the Western approach to medical science. And in the last few decades, when this kind of revolution of humanity, a kind of second renaissance that led us from the 50s to the 60s to today, with the development of technology and everything like this, the modern approach started to want to understand more about what was going on with acupuncture, at least in the fields that were interested in it. So it's sought to find a scientific explanation for the channels, meridians, Qi, and energy. Then, with more research into the mechanisms of acupuncture, it was found to stimulate the release of neurotransmitters, which helped to explain the effect of acupuncture on a biomedical and pharmacological basis. Now, it's just my own thought about this progression of our recent history, that if you think about how acupuncture was taken from China, the study and practice of acupuncture, by people like Georges Solier de Meuron, who took it to France, and then his books were translated from Chinese to also he translated texts from Chinese to French, and then they were translated from French to English. pardon the pun, but Chinese whispers starts to ring a bell of this one concept being translated and embellished or distorted or incorrectly perceived from one person to another until it finally reaches the revolution in the Western world, where we're going from black and white TV, and we're going from the 50s where it's women stay in the home and men go to work, and then we've got the hippie movement of the 60s and then to the 70s, and then this kind of new renaissance and the new age movement grabs hold of what they now see as this mystical form of medicine, an energy medicine that is only truly understood by the masters of ancient China. I mean, it's a fantasy that has been, well, a fantastical version of a traditional medicine that has in some capacity been embellished and romanticized by the Western world, because that's, we have a tendency of doing that. We blow things out of proportion. So that's how I see a kind of progression of what was initially a way of explaining the body in a more simplistic way has been kind of, the ball's been taken and run with. And that's why we have all of these different versions of what qi and the channels are, to the point where someone who's not had acupuncture before or is acupuncture naive, they hear about it and it's this mystical medicine that was begun several thousand years ago, and we're still practicing it exactly how it is today, which is completely inaccurate, as we've discovered. We're not even, if we look at how acupuncture was practiced several thousand years ago, it's not even remotely close to what we do today. It's completely different. So that was my own little take on the recent history of the development of acupuncture. So we're going to get into the new perspective on qi, which I'd like to offer. And this is more kind of just breaking down the origin of the concept of qi, what it actually originally meant and what it means today, and why it is important in our clinical setting. I'd also like to add, before I get into dismantling the structure of what qi is and then offering a different perspective on what it is, I'm a firm believer in the concept that there is something else among us, out there, in here, everywhere, that binds us together and that as yet cannot be entirely explained. I believe that there are phenomena that exist in the world that we probably won't come to properly understand until we as a collective species become more open to it. So I'm certainly not saying that a form of energy or a force or some kind of vital force does not exist. I'm a total believer in that. I've had experiences in my life where I can't dispute the fact that something like that exists. What I'm trying to offer is a practical application of what this concept of qi is in a clinical setting, and create a more accessible version of how acupuncture is applied for the modern day, so that we can effectively invite more people that do not know about acupuncture into the practice of acupuncture, so it can proliferate and help more people, essentially. I think that the mystery that kind of comes along with acupuncture does great things to create a hype about it and draws people to the medicine, but I think it also creates a negative stigma about it and pushes a lot of people away. The greater medical community could be an example of that, and perhaps this is why acupuncture has not progressed as rapidly as it could have, because it still has this concept of an invisible force attached to it, which is still not yet quantifiable. So first I'd like to look at this brief passage from the Su Wen. If one acts contrary to the qi of spring, then the minor yang does not promote generation. The liver qi changes internally. If one acts contrary to the qi of summer, then the major yang does not stimulate growth. The heart qi is empty internally. If one acts contrary to the qi of autumn, then the major yin does not collect. The lung qi burns and there is fullness. If one acts contrary to the qi of winter, then the minor yin does not store. The kidney qi is turbid and in the depth. Now, the yin and yang qi of the 4 seasons, they constitute root and basis of the myriad beings. Hence, the sages in spring and summer nourish the yang, and in autumn and in winter nourish the yin, and in this way they follow their roots. Hence, they are in the depth or the surface with the myriad beings at the gate to life and growth. So it's a very romantic depiction of how the practitioners of ancient China saw the world, and how one should carry themselves and behave in such a way as to be in harmony with the earth and with nature. It also says to me that there are a lot of different ways we can think about qi, and it starts to become quite ambiguous as to which way we need to go and what we need to do with all of these different types of qi influencing us and us influencing the different types of qi. If you took qi out of all of that, you would still get the same message, right? So what I'm trying to convey here is that qi is at the center of all things. All is made of qi, and everything makes qi, and it's essentially the glue that binds everything. So if you were to remove the concept of qi, can you still convey the same message? So the infinite variety of phenomena in the universe is the result of the continuous coming together and dispersion of qi to form phenomena and various degrees of materialization. Qi is the very basis of the universe's infinite manifestations of life, including minerals, vegetables, and animals. Neither the classical nor modern Chinese texts speculate on the nature of qi, nor do they attempt to conceptualize it. Rather, qi is perceived functionally by what it does. This is a very interesting point by Ted Kapchuk from The Web That Has No Weaver. He's saying that qi is a function, and this is confirmed in, you can read the ancient texts. This is a modern summary of this individual's understanding of what the ancient Chinese speculated qi to be, and other modern authors also confirm this as well, that qi is not referred to as this physical thing that can be that is tangible and can be properly put into any one box. It's a concept, it's a function of what's actually going on in the body. We can perhaps think of qi as matter on the verge of becoming energy, or energy at the point of materializing. So once again, it's that if you're familiar with the concept of yin and yang, there's always this one becoming the other. There's never a point where one is actually in its entire form in balance on either end of the spectrum, because if that happens, that creates stagnation and the whole system stops or falls apart. There is always the one becoming the other. So as soon as yang reaches its zenith, it then starts, it hits its peak and then falls into the descent of yin. And once yin reaches its lowest point, it then begins the ascent back to yang. There's never a point where one is stationary or able to become stagnant. So it's like qi is that pivotal point between the two ends of the spectrum of equality or balance and equality. So we can see that qi has a multifaceted meaning. It describes all things from the universe to earth and nature and humankind. We experience the manifestations of qi rather than the qi itself. As far as describing the human experience, qi appears to be a way of describing not just the states of the body, but also our state of mind, our emotions, as well as a way of describing our physical being rather than the physiological mechanisms themselves. This is an interesting point because in the modern day, we have this concept of de qi. It's a physical experience that the patient is exposed to when they have acupuncture. And just a reminder that no one English word or phrase can adequately capture its meaning. So on one hand, we've got a very specific version of what a form of qi is in de qi. And then on the other hand, we are not entirely sure what it is, because it is so elusive that to even speak about it, to even name it, will kind of tarnish its very essence. It's a very Taoist approach to things. You can't name the Tao. Once you name the Tao, it's no longer the Tao. So even though there is no adequate word in English to properly sum up what qi is, there appears to be a lot of words in a lot of other different languages that have some comparison. So in Chinese we have qi, in Japanese we have ki, which is essentially the Japanese word for qi. In Hinduism we have prana, which is breath or vital force. So that's what yogis refer to when you practice yoga. You can feel the prana, which essentially is an analog for the concept of qi. It's similar but different. It's the Indian continent's approach to the vital force. Then we have ancient Egypt. They called it Heka, which is the magical force which pervades all things. Native American, they called it Manitou, which is the life force. And in Christianity, we of course have Spiritus Sanctus, which is the Holy Spirit, that which pervades all things. In modern physics, astrophysics, quantum mechanics, theoretical physics, we have a similar kind of understanding of what's going on in the world. Quarks are subatomic particles and are the most basic building blocks of matter that make up protons and neutrons. They're held together by the strong interaction, a strong force, that is one of the four fundamental forces in nature. The other three being electromagnetism, weak interaction, and gravity. We can see that today we've still got this elusive concept where we as a species are always trying to delve deeper into what's sub to the subatomic particles, and what's, how deep can we go until, you can't explore anymore and you just realize that everything's made of essentially the same stuff. So this is not a new concept. We're just exploring the same thing and getting deeper on a very old concept. Atomic theory was conceived by Democritus, and he was around in 460 to 370 BCE. So atomos meaning a piece of matter could only be continually divided a finite number of times. So even 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks were conceiving this concept of a single unit that could not be could no longer be divisible. It was the building blocks that made everything up. So even though that's different to qi, it's similar in that there is this essential structure that makes up everything. It's the force that binds everything together. And even in the modern day, we have astrophysicists and theoretical physicists who profess to be devout atheists. They still speak of something that is still elusive and still a mystery in this universe. It's the very thing that drives them. We've got a couple of heroes of mine. We've got Neil deGrasse Tyson, who says, "We are stardust brought to life, then empowered by the universe to figure itself out, and we have only just begun. We do not simply live in this universe. The universe lives within us." So even people such as this who follow strict theories and equations to understand their reality, and who have pioneered some of the greatest thought concepts in the modern day, they're still open to this philosophical conceptual idea that we are this large living organism bound together by some yet undiscovered or unseen force. Then we've got Brian Cox, who says, "We are the cosmos made conscious, and life is the means by which the universe understands itself." Even that, it's implying that there's this one ultimate organism that has expressed itself out on the search to understand what it is. "Every carbon atom in every living thing on the planet was produced in the heart of a dying star." That speaks to atomic theory. It also speaks to the philosophical conceptual ideas of qi, that there is this one force that creates all and that we are all a part of. So what does that mean for us in the modern day? We don't need to be philosophers or theoretical physicists or believe in the weird things that go on with quantum mechanics that have been proven. That is irrelevant when we walk into our clinic and we get a needle and we stick it in someone's body to elicit a healing response. You don't need to know any of that because, in my belief anyway, other people may disagree. Even if you don't know any of that, even if you know nothing about qi, if you put a needle in someone's body, it's still going to elicit a response. Something is still going to happen because of the repeatable mechanistic cascades of the human body. You don't need to have this background of what's going on with someone's energy system in order for that to happen. Now, people may disagree with me, and they might say that the strength of the response of what's going on in the body can change with your intention. I totally agree with that. They have found that particles, the behavior of particles alter due to the very presence of a witness within the experiment. Not going to get into that now. That's a whole other story. But look, I am a believer in that the intention has a big part to play in someone's healing journey, but I don't think it strictly has to be about a one rigid philosophical approach or a rigid conceptual approach to something. So just a reminder that qi was incorrectly translated as energy by Georges Solier-Dimeron at the start of the 20th century. And then the interpretation of qi as energy, so widespread in TCM literature today, lacks any historical basis. That is a confirming statement, if I ever heard it, that, what does it even mean for qi to be energy? What does that even mean? It has no relevance to the application of acupuncture compared to what qi actually means. So qi is not energy. Qi is a function or a process. So if we look at my rendition of the abstract perspective of TCM and what is going on in the organs and with the qi, it's important to keep in mind, and practitioners of acupuncture will understand this, and those who have not studied Chinese medicine, there are a number of different ways you can approach Chinese medicine and a number of different ways you can diagnose from a TCM perspective what's going on in the body. So there's 5 elements, there's the 8 patterns, there's the 6 divisions, there's Zhang Fu, which is the internal organs. As I understand, the application of the Zhang Fu concept, the internal organs, is very much coupled with the application of traditional Chinese herbal medicine, whereas channel theory is more the basis of acupuncture. So there are so many different ways that you get to the point where you can have 5 practitioners of 5 different schools of thought diagnosing people in 5 different ways, and they'll still put the same acupuncture needle into the same point. So the purpose of this is to declutter, if you will, the approach to acupuncture. The most important thing with all of these diagnostic principles is that, I suppose one thing maybe they can all agree on, is the application of the needle and the eliciting the response of de qi. So here we go. What is the most important aspect of qi that has the greatest influence on our treatment? Once again, if we were to get rid of all of the other concepts of qi and what's going on in the body and yin and yang and everything like that, we still need to elicit this de qi response. So even in clinical trials, they may dispense with all the TCM theory, but they will still aim to get this de qi response. So it involves a multitude of nerve fiber types, from fast conducting myelinated fibers with higher thresholds to slow conducting unmyelinated fibers with lower thresholds. As I said before, experiments have shown that slower conducting A delta fibers and C fibers are involved in the dull sensation experienced in the de qi sensation, while numbness and tingling may involve A beta fibers. Historical and contemporary sources agree that obtaining qi is necessary for gaining the best therapeutic effects from a treatment, as I was saying before. Just a revisitation, how is de qi defined? So from the patient's experience, I know we went over this before, but I'm breaking it down now into the different sensations that the patient experiences and the physiological reasons for those. So we've got Xuan, soreness, Ma, numbness, Zhang, fullness or distension, and Zhong, heaviness. May also involve sensations of heat, cold, pain, itching, fasciculation, formication, which is the feeling of insects crawling under your skin, and referral patterns. There may also be a red skin rash, red or white lines, involuntary muscle movements. Now, the practitioner's experience may feel heavy, tight, or we may feel a vibration on the needle. So let's break these down and see what's going on. With the sensation of soreness, numbness, fullness, distension, and heaviness, remember that we've got different types of nerve fibers. We've got the unmyelinated nerve fibers responsible for continuous conduction, and the myelinated nerve fibers responsible for saltatory conduction. These give an array of different sensations, all of which you can see are pretty integral to the sensation of De Qi. This is, as an acupuncturist, we say, I'm going to insert the needle now, I'm going to manipulate a little bit, stimulate a little bit, and you may feel some soreness, some numbness, vibration, heaviness, aching. All of these sensations are completely normal. What we don't want you to feel is any pain or discomfort. So that's basically a chart for what you should feel as qi, and you can see that the thing responsible for providing those sensations are a range of different nerve fibers, unmyelinated and myelinated. So the sensations of heat, cold, pain, itching, fasciculation, formication, referral patterns. Remember back to biology 1, it probably was, we have all of these different receptors in the skin. So we have mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, nociceptors, and osmoreceptors. So mechanoreceptors are responsive to changes in the actual structural integrity of the cells and the surrounding tissue. Thermoreceptors respond to hot and cold. Nociceptors respond to pain and itching. Or provide the sensation of itching, and osmoreceptors respond to the fluid balance within the tissues. So if those are manipulated in some way through the range of different nerve fibers, you could elicit these kind of sensations, even though there's no source of heat or source of pressure actually stimulating the nerves. If you've got a stimulus in the form of the needle that's sending signals to the nerve fibers, then you can elicit all of these different responses. And of course, the big telltale sign for any practitioner to see that there is a big qi response, big De Qi response, is the red skin rash. So I showed you this photo before. You can see the pink blushing on the skin here. This is characteristic of what we would call a good qi response. And if the bigger the qi response, it means the person has bigger qi and they're probably more robust. The less qi response, they could be deficient. But what is this really? It's one of the signs of inflammation. Actually, all of the signs of inflammation are within that proof, if you will, of the qi response. So inflammation is a non-specific defensive response of the body to tissue damage. That's essentially what we're doing, isn't it? When we're putting a needle in, it's minute tissue damage. So the 4 characteristic signs and symptoms of inflammation are redness, pain, which you can experience on a multitude of levels depending on your tolerance of pain, but usually acupuncture is not painful, but you could, on a level of 1 to 100, it might be a 3. Heat and swelling. Well, when there's vasodilation, there's going to be more blood, there's going to be more heat. So the heat is involved, and swelling doesn't always happen with everyone, but some people, people with more sensitive skin, if they've got urticaria or something like that, there may be some very slight swelling. So these are all signs of inflammation. It's the body's natural immune defense to an invading pathogenic factor, if you will. The pathogenic factor is a stainless steel needle, which is sterile. So there's not actually anything to genuinely attack because it's not delivering any pathogenic substance. So this is one of the ways that acupuncture is one of the mechanisms how acupuncture is believed to work, is that when we insert the needle into the body, it's essentially like an invading pathogenic factor. And what happens is that the body will mount a response, so send out chemical mediators and cascades and everything like that, and go to attack the invading pathogen. But because the needle is sterile, it's not delivering any disease or virus or anything like that, so there's nothing to actually attack. What the body does instead is starts to repair any damage in that area that it finds. So we might say, well, why doesn't the body just take care of that anyway? Well, as health practitioners, we know that the body can get into chronic inflammatory conditions where it can't help itself out of it for whatever reason. Our body gets stuck in these negative holding patterns, whether it's diet, stress, whatever it is. But an inflammation cascade will start often with an acute form of inflammation, and if it's not solved, it will turn into chronic inflammation, which starts destroying the body over long periods of time. So if it's acute inflammation, we're essentially stimulating that acute inflammatory response. So we're boosting it and helping it, which is why sometimes you can give acupuncture to someone who has had, a acute back sprain or something like that, and it will flare up in the first 8 to 24 hours. It's a normal response. And essentially what's happening is you're stimulating the immune response for something that otherwise may take longer to heal. For someone who has chronic inflammation, it's stuck in that negative feedback cycle, that negative feedback loop. So by introducing a stimulus to the environment in the form of acupuncture, you're like putting a glitch in the cycle and you're allowing the body to get out of that negative holding pattern. So you're essentially using acute inflammation to treat chronic inflammation. The acute inflammation causes vasodilation, gets more of those chemical mediators to the area that had been experiencing chronic inflammation, and it helps to pull the body out of that negative holding pattern, and eventually this is why chronic inflammation responds so well, usually, to acupuncture. So then we have the heaviness and tightness, or the vibration that the practitioner may feel after they've inserted the needle. So remember, we were talking about that needle grab sensation. Remember, we've got the nerve fibers that become wrapped around the needle and creating the needle grasp feeling. And then unidirectional needle rotation causes winding and gathering of collagen around the needle, pulling collagen towards the needle and inducing an active cellular response in connective tissue fibroblasts up to several centimeters away. Remember when I put the needle into the chicken fillet earlier, you could see how much of a response that provided. So that's essentially the understanding of what's going on with that needle grasp and what we're feeling. So ultimately, perhaps qi is not as mysterious as we have been led to believe. So as we saw before, there are a number of factors that are determining how effective an acupuncture treatment is for an individual. We saw that essentially it relies a lot on there being a nerve pathway there to deliver a signal from where the acupuncture needle is stimulating the body to the central nervous system. That seems to be key in eliciting the De Qi response and in an effective treatment outcome. So could we say then that qi is essentially describing a set of signals, so nerve signals in the form of inflammation and nerve stimulation that elicits physiological responses that we can feel as the patient and as the practitioner as well. And these are a result of physiological processes in the body which occur as a result of mechanisms and sequential cascades. Given the right environment and circumstances, these processes are repeatable. As far as the mechanisms of the body go, even though it is extremely complex, I mean, just the cascade of chemical mediators that occur during the inflammatory response, it seems very overwhelming when you start learning about it. But if you dig deep into it, you start realizing that these chemical responses and these cascades are all steps in a process. It's one thing leads to another. And a lot of the time it comes back to on or off switches, positive and negative feedback loops. The body's either in sympathetic or parasympathetic response. So it's complex in its simplicity. We can use that to have an understanding that about when you apply an acupuncture needle to the physiological system, it too will always create a repeatable response. So all going well in an average human body, if you cut yourself, then you'll have an inflammatory response. If you put a needle in, you'll also have some sort of response. Regardless of whether we want to call that De Qi, or if we look at that from the perspective of the modern medical framework, or from the traditional Chinese medicine framework, the same thing is going to happen. So we can then take the next step and say that qi as a philosophical concept has as much influence on the modern clinical application of acupuncture as atoms and subatomic particles. So although I love the mystery and the romanticism of traditional Chinese medicine and the poetic approach to nature and human physiology, I personally think that its place in the treatment room may not have as much importance or have as much influence on the treatment as it did in recent times. So considering that, What if we were to remove the concept of qi altogether from the treatment process? How would the treatment outcome change? Would it change at all? What would happen if those 5 practitioners who were diagnosing the same patient from 5 different perspectives didn't use any of it and still put the same acupuncture needle in? Would we still have a treatment response? I think we would. So, considering that, what if we take all of these considerations about what De Qi is, the stimulation of an acupuncture point, and knowing what we know now, that the responses from the patient and what the practitioner experiences are all explainable by physiological processes, could we perhaps remove the concept of qi and then simply call it point activation? This way we could have a non-denominal approach to acupuncture, and to simply base it on what we can definitely see with proven anatomy and proven mechanisms, and use this as a way of explaining what's going on in the body when we apply acupuncture. Once again, I'm not saying that qi isn't there. I'm just trying to create some form of neutral perspective that practitioners of all schools of thought, whether they're physiotherapists, whether they're osteopaths, whether they're general practitioners or specialists or massage therapists or acupuncturists, we don't have to have a background in traditional Chinese medicine to understand what's going on in the body. And if we were able to remove the concept of qi from the practice of acupuncture, then what does this mean? Do we actually need to study all of the ancient texts to get an understanding of what's going on in the body when we're learning about the anatomical and physiological approach anyway? We often learn 2 conflicting ideas of what's going on in the body from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective and from a modern medicine perspective. And for those who have studied traditional Chinese medicine, you can't deny that sometimes it's a little confusing and maybe a little time consuming to learn 2 different schools of thought to come to the same conclusion, or a very similar conclusion, which is putting the needle in a point. So as I said, to summarize the new perspective on qi that I'm proposing is one of neutrality, is one of inclusion, where we can all understand what's going on in the body and not rely on the mystery of the past to be an explanation for something that we don't fully understand. Because as we've seen, there are nerve pathways all over the body. I think if there's something odd happening in the body, there's going to be an explanation for it. We just don't understand what it is yet. And I think relying on an elusive and invisible form of energy or qi or whatever you want to call it, it's more likely that there's going to be an explainable rationale as to the mechanism of what's going on. The other purpose of this is, as I said, energy or qi or the biofield, whatever it is. What if we just neutralized all of those terms and just called it the body response or point activation or just the anatomy and physiology of the body responding to a stimulus? So that's what I'm proposing essentially, is that we have this new understanding of an inclusive perspective of what qi is and how the body responds to acupuncture. Now looking at the new perspective on the channels. So some of the proposed ideas for the acupuncture channels are the premovascular system, which are also known as Bonghan corpuscles and ducts. So these were proposed by a researcher called Bonghan Kim, a Korean fellow who found this new system of ducts and corpuscles within the body that he believed were an explanation for the acupuncture channels. The issue with this idea is that his research was inconsistent. They tried to recreate the research to get the same results, and they were unable to do it because he left a lot of the data out. He left a lot of the ways he actually found the research out of his findings. So it was not actually possible to recreate the exact findings that he did. So it has been disregarded as an explanation for acupuncture channels. Next, we've got imaging studies with radioactive tracers. So this is where they inject a radioactive dye into the body, into what they believed were the planes of the acupuncture channels. Once again, any similarity that they drew to what they found in their imaging to actual acupuncture channels were no more than just the lines of muscles and the fascia bundles that actually go up the arm, which doesn't give proof to the acupuncture channels, because it's just following the curvature and the topography of the arm itself. And mind you, also they only went a certain distance within the proposed channel, and they started branching off, and they were inconsistent with the proposed primary channels. So then we have infrared scans for acupuncture points. These have also been discredited as being genuine because there's no consistency with the channels. And then skin resistance, claiming that there's a change in the voltage of the skin. Once again, there's no consistency with the findings of any of these studies to confirm that these are what the acupuncture channels are. The one proposed theory that seems to hold up the most is the neural hypothesis. And what I find funny is that we've got all of these proposed concepts that particularly the Chinese medicine community seeks to grab onto it in the hope that we finally found proof of the channels. And the neural hypothesis is the most obvious one, but people still won't accept it. I wonder if the prima vascular system, all these imaging studies actually did prove it. If the purists of TCM would turn around and say, "Oh no, it's still not the channel," because I think there is, there's strength in the narrative and the story that we tell us that we have something different to other forms of medicine that they don't, that we've got something that we can hold on to and that we can own, we can have to ourselves. And as soon as it's proven by another field, perhaps that takes some of the power away in the stories that we and narratives that we invest our energy into. Having said that, we must not grasp at straws and let our confirmation bias get the best of us. So the confirmation bias is noted in human psychology. It's a thing that we do in our lives to confirm the narrative that we tell ourselves. So if we wake up each day and we've got poor self-esteem and things aren't going great for us, our brain will search for things to confirm this narrative to know that we are right. Similar in another circumstance, if you believe that everything is great and life is just a dream, you'll search for things to confirm this. It's a known thing in human psychology. It's what we do to create a version of our reality. So if things start falling apart around us, then our mind won't crumble as well. So the reason why I bring this up is because of what was discovered in 2018. It was a new organ in the body called the interstitium. So it's a network of fluid-filled pockets found everywhere throughout the body that surrounds arteries, muscles, the digestive and urinary tracts. The fluid-filled pockets are surrounded by a web of collagen interwoven by elastin. It's said to hold up to 10 liters of water, 20% of the body's fluids that were previously unaccounted for. Now, the interstitium was hiding in plain sight for decades and was found by chance. It was previously thought to be dense connective tissue, found on visual inspection of a cancer patient's bile duct using a new technique called confocal laser endomicroscopy. Not known about before because histological slides had always been dried and stained, so it was only when they were doing an in vivo study that they found this new organ called the interstitium. So when this organ was discovered, there was a wave of commotion throughout the TCM community. It was on the pages of people were publishing it on their Facebook groups, acupuncture practitioners, because it appeared that finally we had proof of something that we had known all along. And I don't know if any of you remember what people published or what people speculated as to what this organ, the interstitium, was. Can you guess what it is? That's right, the Sanjiao, the official in charge of irrigation, which controls the water passages. For those of you who are not familiar with traditional Chinese medicine, there is a conceptual organ. It's not real. It's not physical, that is. It's called the Sanjiao, which means triple burner or triple heater. So it basically conceptually separates the three sections of the of the trunk of the body into 3 heaters or burners. So you've got the upper jiao, which is the lungs and the heart, the middle jiao, which is the liver and spleen and stomach and things like that, and then the lower jiao, which is your intestine and bladder and kidneys are in the middle or the lower, I can't remember. But it's essentially a conceptual way of understanding what goes on in the body with fluid metabolism. It's not a real organ, even though we have an acupuncture channel that that goes along with it. So this is what I'm talking about, where medical science discovers a new organ and then the TCM community leaps on it because of the narrative that we tell ourselves that we have something that is unique and mysterious and harks back to a time before now when everything was better, and when, you know, traditional Chinese medicine practitioners were the forefront, the front line of the medical community. So, and I'm not trying to bag my own kind here. I'm doing this out of concern that this is something that some of us, not all of us, and it's probably only a small number, but this is a trap that we can allow ourselves to fall into. And it's not just TCM practitioners that do it, it's practitioners from other modalities that fall into their own traps as well, holding on to something with absolute ferocity because they believe that this is the way things should be. But as traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, if we're going to say that the interstitium is the Sanjiao and that we knew about all of these things before modern medical science did, then what happens when we talk about the pancreas or the fascia system, the lymphatic vessels, the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the differences in the spleen from traditional Chinese medicine to allopathic medicine? So once again, for non-TCM practitioners, these things, except for the spleen, these things don't exist in the TCM theory. The pancreas is not recognized as an organ. There's no fascia system. I mean, that's okay, fair enough. That's a recent development even for medical science. But there's no lymphatic vessels. There's no nervous system. These are all functions of the channels. And the spleen in traditional Chinese medicine is in charge of digestion, wherein we know that from a medical perspective that the spleen is mainly in charge of your immune system. So this is what I'm talking about, where it's a trap to fall into these things where we try to bolster our own medicine based on these new discoveries, when we can't actually substantiate inconsistencies with TCM and what's actually legitimately been discovered in the body. So with these proposed ideas, there have been many attempts to try to establish a physical basis of the channels, now also referred to as the meridians, and only one explanation has come close to doing this. So of course, the neural hypothesis, that the channels, the functions of the channels, are actually a manifestation, a way of conceptualizing what's actually being controlled by the nervous system. So the nerves are the essential system from which all things in the body arise and take instruction from and receive information from sensory input. But we know that the body is multifaceted, so while the nervous system does explain many of the functions, as we have discovered, there are multiple other systems in the body that play their part in maintaining homeostasis. So we're talking about the lymphatic system, the cardiovascular system. These all have manifestations that are attributed to the functions of the channels. So it's not all about electrons firing to create nervous signals. The functions of the other systems play a large part in generating sensations and responses in addition to the nervous system that contribute to the subjective experience of the patient and the objective experience of the practitioner during acupuncture. However, despite all of the many and varied systems and all of the manifestations that they create that form the basis of the acupuncture channels, all mechanisms, reflexes, and responses all come back to the nervous system. Everything is controlled by the nervous system, whether it's the heart, whether it's your digestion. It all comes back to the nervous system. So we could say that even though there are many manifestations of all of the other systems in the body that provide the basis of the channels, what's driving all of those systems is the electrical center of the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and enteric nervous system. let's go back to the interstitium before. It was hiding in plain sight for decades and was found by chance. So this is an important thing to consider when we're coming up with a new perspective of what the channels are. So here it is. What if the meridians or channels are not an elusive mapping system of energy, but rather a very real expression of the total amalgamation of physiological processes, combined together and interpreted through a holistic and naturalistic filter to present as a system of channels? They are the combined sum of all of the body's physiological processes acting as a singular unit and manifesting in specific courses along the body delineated by dermatomes, nerve pathways, blood, and lymphatic vessels. So this is where we look at the importance of viewing an ancient Eastern paradigm through a modern Western perspective. I know it seems like I'm aiming to replace what was developed in the past, and in some way it's a natural progression. That's what happens. This is why Western medical science no longer uses quicksilver and bloodletting and frontal lobotomies. I think they don't use that anymore because it's outdated. It's not used anymore. It causes problems. And obviously the application of acupuncture is safe when it's done by a qualified practitioner. However, if we hold on to certain aspects of traditional Chinese medicine, I believe that they can start causing problems as well. One of the examples is if we have someone with extremely high blood pressure, they come in and we don't check it with our tools like a sphygmomanometer and our stethoscope, or an electric one if you've got that. If we don't check their chronically high blood pressure, which they choose not to get diagnosed or they choose not to treat because they can't stand GPs, if we're their first practitioner that they go to, and we miss that, then that can potentially be a fatal result. If we have someone come in complaining of extreme headaches, they get dizziness, their eyes are bloodshot, their face is red, they're short of breath, all of these red flags, and we say, oh, I think you've got liver yang rising, I'll just do some acupuncture, and then if that doesn't help it, then we can try some bloodletting to let the heat out of the system. If that's all you do, and this person has clogged arteries and they walk out and they have a stroke or a myocardial infarction, that's a major mistake. That's unforgivable as a health practitioner, because we're here to help people, right? I mean, I'm not saying everyone's perfect. You're not going to get everything. I'm just using this as a very basic example. I had that in my clinic. A woman had blood pressure of 180 over 110. What would happen if I didn't check that? She started taking a blood pressure medication not long after that, because me as her first port of call as a health practitioner decided to check her blood pressure. So that's the position I'm coming from, where my concern is that if we adhere strictly to these traditional concepts without at least integrating a new modern perspective, don't get rid of it completely, because that's the history of our medicine. It's I don't believe it should be completely expunged from existence. I'm just saying we need to understand what to learn from and where to progress and where to integrate into new places or into new approaches. Perhaps this is why there is no physiological explanation for the channels, because we are complicating the search for something that is right there in front of us. The phenomena of the channels is really just the miraculous play of the body working as it should. I like this quote. In essence, when you touch a human body, you are touching an intimately connected system composed of virtually all of the molecules within the body linked together. So we are trained to see channels superimposed over the human body as though we have a network separate from the body itself. We see the channels as what affects the body, not the body doing the work itself. We can get so caught up in the mysticism of TCM that we can forget that what is actually doing all of the work is not the acupuncture needle, but the body. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that the body will respond to a stimulus or any stimulus in many different ways, and that the when I hear patients say, "Oh, acupuncture is so amazing," or this mystery of acupuncture, which it is amazing, but it's the body doing the work. It's not the acupuncture. It's the body responding to a stimulus. So perhaps there are no channels, but rather the natural topography of the body made up by its physical structures. And no acupuncture points, but peripheral nerves situated at specific locations along these topographical landmarks. When stimulated, these points elicit specific repeatable responses within the central nervous system due to the location of the nerves and their plexi in relation to internal organs and systems. This layout then presents as an organized system of channels. So with the advent of modern medical imaging, we have explored the body to the nth degree as far as we can so far. We've gotten pretty good at it. We can do 4D scans now of the fetus in the uterus. We can do complete three-dimensional scans. We can look inside the body while someone is still alive. We've cut people open thousands and thousands of times over. We've done X-rays, CT scans, MRI, functional MRI scans, and as yet we have still not found any evidence of the acupuncture channels in the way that they are proposed. So perhaps maybe it is time to look forward into the future and remove the superimposed concepts that we have projected onto the human body from the TCM framework, and then moving forward into a more progressive and inclusive understanding of the body and acupuncture, to understand that perhaps the channels are really just the miraculous working of the nervous system doing what it does best, keeping us alive and protecting us from harm. Getting towards the end now, I'd just like to run through some channel comparisons to emphasize the similarities of the nervous system and the actual channels themselves. So in this rendition that I've done, we've got the channels on the man on the left and the nervous system in the woman on the right. Even though they're not exact, you can start to see that there are some notable similarities. So let's start off. We've got the channels of the palmar aspect of the hand and the forearm. So on the left side, we've got the nerves, and on the right side, we've got the channels. You can't deny that there's a striking similarity between the channel layout and where the nerves go. The superficial radial nerve corresponds pretty much directly to the lung channel, even down to where the lung channel does its bend here on the wrist. You've got the superficial branch of the radial nerve that comes down onto the thenar eminence of the thumb. Then you've got the median nerve, which comes down, and there's the point where it goes down into what is the pericardium channel, what I was talking about in the previous parts that you can feel with the stimulation of pericardium 6, and the heart channel, which is essentially the ulnar nerve. Next, we've got the superficial radial nerve on the dorsal aspect of the hand, corresponding to the large intestine channel. Sanjiao channel, which runs up the middle, which corresponds to the dorsal interosseous nerve. And then the ulnar nerve on the dorsal aspect comes down, innervating the backside of the hand here, which is the small intestine channel. I'd like to make an interesting point here. You may have noticed that the superficial radial nerve is both the lung channel and the large intestine channel, while the ulnar nerve is both the small intestine channel and the heart channel. The interesting thing is, for those who are not TCM practitioners, the heart channel and the small intestine channel are right next to each other. They're also the yin and yang paired channels. The large intestine and the lung channel are the yin and yang paired channels on this aspect here. They're stimulating the same nerve, which is an interesting thing because the lower connecting point connects the yin and yang channel, but the points are on the same nerve, which I find very interesting. Then we've got the lower leg. We've got the tibial nerve, the saphenous nerve, and the superficial perineal nerve on the medial aspect of the leg. I mean, the kidney, spleen, and liver on this side. I mean, look at the similarities of the distribution of the nerves here to the pathway of the channel. Why does it do that? Why would they have decided that the points go all around here if not for the fact that there was a reason to do it, like there's a sensation that can be elicited under the surface, namely the nerves here. So then we've got the saphenous nerve, which comes down and basically explains a lot of the spleen channel. There are some crossovers here. So obviously the spleen channel comes down and branches over into the kidney channel, and then the superficial perineal nerve is along the liver channel, but then obviously the liver channel comes up and crosses over the saphenous nerve. Once again, the ancient Chinese did not know about nerves, so I don't expect that they figured out the exact pathways. They're just following with the sensations of nerves in the body. There's going to be some crossover at some point. And then on the lateral aspect, we've got the sural nerve, which is responsible for giving sensations to the bladder channel. The deep perineal nerve, which is responsible for giving sensations, comes down the tibialis anterior here, which is exactly where the stomach channel is. And then the superficial perineal nerve, which comes down and explains the pathway of the gallbladder channel, at least on the lower part of the leg. Once again, crossovers, but I find that interesting. You've got the head of the fibula here, which is basically on the anterior aspect of the head of the fibula, you've got stomach 36. On the posterior aspect, you have gallbladder 34. But they come from the same nerve. They're two nerves branching down almost exactly where the stomach channel and the gallbladder channel go. So there's a problem-solving principle called Occam's razor, which essentially states that simpler solutions are more likely to be correct than complex ones. So to explain the mechanisms of acupuncture and the physiological expressions of the body, is there a complex network of invisible channels overlaid on the body, which is separate to the actual anatomy and physiology of the body, which explains all of this? Is that the answer to it? Or is it the body's nervous system which presents as a system of channels developed by an ancient culture which has survived to today? So why am I saying all of this? What is the point? Well, for education, understanding, progression, and adaptation. The reason why I'm so passionate about educating acupuncture practitioners and other practitioners and just the general public about this is because I have so much faith in acupuncture. When I first started studying it, I have to admit I was slightly put off by the TCM concepts. I have such an analytical mind that I cannot support something if I don't believe that it's real, if I can't see the evidence for it. And what brought me to acupuncture, I admit, was the mysticism, but what kept me here was the fact that there was proof to it and it had measurable results. So I wanted to understand what those results were. The fact that there was a channel passing through particular regions of the body was not a suitable enough answer for me. I had to understand why. This journey has led me to what you're now experiencing now, the new perspective on Qi and the channels. So I hope that this can educate acupuncture practitioners on what's actually going on with the channels to give you a better understanding from a neurophysiological perspective. I want the public to have a better understanding of what acupuncture is so it's more widely accessible. I want to see acupuncture progress. I don't want to see it being held back because of our community holding on to mystical concepts just because we feel like we're going to lose a part of ourselves. And I also want to see us adapt. I would love to see acupuncture being brought into all different forms of healthcare from hospitals. I mean, people are practicing it the world over now, either in the form of dry needling or acupuncture. It's certainly not going away, but I think that it can be applied with greater efficacy. It can be more streamlined and it can be more widely accepted if it has more of a simplistic explanation to it, a more familiar explanation, not just it's based on an ancient medicine that we don't fully understand and we're still trying to figure out. So does this knowledge demystify our art? Yes, of course it does. That's the whole purpose of it, to take away the mystery and to replace it with mastery instead. Does it make it even more interesting? I certainly hope so. When the explanation I was given was that there's an invisible channel, I mean, that's mysterious and that sounds cool, but then to know that there's a nerve pathway there that's doing things beyond the explanation of traditional Chinese medicine, that is so much more interesting to me. That is more miraculous and more mysterious than any invisible channel system that is superimposed over the body. So the thing that we need to be careful not to fall back on is the argument of antiquity fallacy, which is it has been around for thousands of years, so therefore it must work. That's not what science is about. Science needs hard evidence. Science needs repeatable results. And in a world that is now governed and defined by a extremely futuristic technologically advanced society and expression of the human condition, we need a better argument than just to say, well, it's been around for several thousand years, so it's got to work. We need evidence. So which aspects of acupuncture hold up to science and which ones do not? That's an important thing to consider. So yes, while there may be repeatable results that you can get from basing your treatment protocol on the acupuncture channels or the Zhang Fu or qi moving around in the body, that's not acceptable for a wider scientific community. And I believe that may be part of the reason that acupuncture is not progressing as fast as it should, is because we expect the medical community to adhere to what our beliefs are, as opposed to accepting that there is anatomy and physiological processes underlying the mechanisms of acupuncture. So, I mean, we're in an amazing time of history right now. We can actually understand what's happening with acupuncture. Why wouldn't we want to go out and explore it and accept that there are things going on that are with explanations that are so much more sophisticated than just a channel system? We can understand what the nerves are doing. We understand physiological processes and mechanisms down to the molecule and down to the atom now. So as I said before, this is my passion because I would like to exchange the mystery of acupuncture for mastering the mechanisms and understanding exactly what's going on. Essentially, so I can help more people, I can teach more people, they can help more people, and the world can progress. I mean, it's also about the human race as a whole, opening ourselves up to progressing forward and not staying in the past where things essentially stagnate. Ironically, the whole ethos of Chinese medicine is that we must, things need to keep moving or they stagnate, and I feel like that's exactly what is being done with traditional Chinese medicine. Holding on to these theories is allowing us to essentially stagnate and not move forward. So that brings us to the end of New Perspectives on Qi and the Channels, a neurophysiological explanation of acupuncture. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed it as much as I loved putting it together. As you've probably noticed, I'm very passionate about this kind of thing. I'm open to any questions, any feedback, any comments that you have. I will answer all of them in due course. So remember, if you want to obtain your certificate, make sure you follow the link below to complete the course quiz, get in contact with us, and we'll send out the certificate for you. And make sure you check out all of our courses and content that we have to offer from On Point Pro. Thanks again for sticking around. This has been a New Perspective on Qi and the Channels, a neurophysiological explanation of acupuncture. I'm Dr. Chris Ferris, registered acupuncturist, and I'll see you in the next course.